The Dial Valley of Fannin County in the North Georgia mountains. Remote, pristine, situated on the Toccoa River, full of history.
This house is known as the Cochran Davenport House. George Cochran built it in 1885.
This is a unique farmstead, one of the last in existence in Georgia, with a full array of outbuildings. The land that the farmstead is built on dates back to the indigenous Cherokee people. The late Elma Ettman was one of the owners of this historic farmstead.
George Cochran was the son-in-law of the original settler of Fannin County, who is Louis Van Zandt.
Van Zandt purchased his land from different speculators who had won 1832 Georgia Land Lottery 160-acre grants. One parcel he acquired right after the land lottery was number 249 from William Downs, a Revolutionary War veteran living in Effingham County near Savannah. Van Zandt moved his family from North Carolina to this land along the Toccoa River in 1834, traveling in a Conestoga wagon driven by 6 horses with his wife and 2 small children.
They came in a wagon. Apparently, a part of the wagon is still in existence over at the Van Zandt house.
On May 21, 1879, 28-year-old George Cochran married Louis Van Zandt's 37-year-old daughter, Eliza. 3 years later, on July 22, 1882, Eliza gave birth to twins, but she and one of the twins died the next day from complications, leaving George with his newborn son, Louis Henry Cochran. In what was a common occurrence during this era, the widower, George Cochran, married Eliza's 46-year-old sister, Lutetia Van Zandt, 6 months after Eliza's death. Lutetia would raise her nephew, Louis, as her own. By 1880, the Van Zandt family had acquired almost 2,000 acres of land in the Dial Valley, including a 160-acre parcel, number 248, which he purchased for $500 in 1853 from Samuel Watts of Floyd County, Georgia. In 1885, Cochran would build a modern Victoria-era home for his family on this land.
It was George Cochran who built the house. He was a man ahead of his times, so the house is very unusual for this region.
Following Cochran's second wife Letitia's death in 1910, the Cochran family would own the home into the early 1920s. It was then that Cochran's nephew, William Prescott Davenport, known as Press, acquired the home. Press had married Lizzie Van Zandt, the granddaughter of Louis Van Zandt, in 1906. A natural-born salesman and entrepreneur, Press had built a general store close to his uncle's home around 1908. Along with a small home next to the store where he and Lizzie started a family.
He had built a store at the bridge crossing. There is a bridge, the Dial Bridge, just beyond the house. The store stood on one side of the bridge.
The Davenports would raise their 4 children in the beautiful Victorian home overlooking the Toccoa River. Press installed the first electric power in the isolated mountain community. A creek on the property was diverted down a long mill race to a water wheel, which then drove a generator, providing power to some of the buildings, including the Cochran Davenport house, Press's store, and the corn crib. The family would live continuously in the home for almost 60 years, with Press running his store across the road until his death in 1956. Lizzie would remain until her death in 1969. Lizzie and Press's son Manly Davenport was the last family member to occupy this house until his death in 1980. Most all are buried in the Van Zandt Cemetery, which is located to the north of the Cochran Davenport house on the large hill that looks peacefully across this section of the Dial Valley and the Toccoa River. In 1985, a young family from Jasper, Georgia acquired the home from the Davenport estate. And then, in 1987, the home was purchased by Elma Ettman.
My dream was to restore the house and put the property on the National Register of Historic Places because it had so much significance to the community.
By then, the 100-year-old home desperately needed renovation. Ettman contracted with Atlanta architect Milan Ventura, who was experienced with historic preservation.
And we started working on the project for fixing the house because it was in inhabitable condition. Okay. We decided to put a real foundation and make things a little more stable and straighten the house at the same time a little bit.
Restoration was underway in August 1987. The doors and mantels were removed, chimneys taken apart, and work was underway to jack the house up to build a new foundation.
On August 23rd, 1987, at 11:30 at night, I was using my phone in the house across the river talking to the contractor who was doing the work for me when I heard a loud boom. I looked out of the window and I saw my dream house engulfed in flames.
It was arson. Someone had walked through the home in the dark of night with a large container of gasoline. Then they struck a match.
The house was burned to the ground. The flames were so large. In old buildings that are over 100 years old, the wood is very dry. It just goes whoosh. I vowed I was going to build the house back. I stood on the road that night and vowed I was going to build it back. Why? I don't know.
It was shock, but I knew that it's just another beginning. They just, that we would start again at a different point, not at the point we wanted to start, but at the point which was sort of forced upon us.
The century-old house was reduced to ash, but miraculously, most of the historic outbuildings survived the fire.
Well, we couldn't do very much for 5 months because the state fire inspector, the arson crew, had to come in. They would not let us touch the ruins.
In an amazing stroke of luck, Ventura had done detailed measurements of the entire house before the fire, creating a full set of blueprints.
Part of the survey of the old house or the existing structure was photographing everything. So everything was photographed, everything was documented and detailed.
The week before the fire, I received my insurance on the property. It was insurance on a historic property, so I had stick-for-stick replacement value insurance on a historic property.
So we immediately went from restoration project into rebuilding project.
In the 2 years following the fire, the home was lovingly rebuilt. The subsequent painstaking reconstruction produced the house that stands today. In 1990, the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation recognized Elma Ettman for outstanding achievement in the field of preservation for the Cochran Davenport House of Dial Valley. The design of the home is considered to be a 2/2 modified dog trot, which means you enter to a large central hall, which then has 2 rooms to either side.
It's it is a pretty typical southern house, which had hall through the center. They always had big, long halls through the center for the draft, for the air movement to keep the house habitable without air conditioning, and then 2 rooms on each side.
You enter through a large central hall. In front is a gourmet kitchen and sunroom. The master bedroom and bath to the right. A family room and dining room are to the left. Upstairs, there's an open space loft directly above the first floor large central hall with 2 bedrooms on either side, along with 2 bathrooms.
What they did here, they repeated the same layout upstairs with the bedrooms, and then back to back between all of those two rooms there were fireplaces. So the house really had 8 fireplaces to start with.
In addition, the home is very unique in that it has a separate parlor in the front. There appears to be 2 front doors, one for the house and one for the parlor.
I believe this is the only house in this area, if not North Georgia, that has a separate parlor. That's where they birthed them and married them and laid them out.
But what makes this property truly unique is all the remarkable outbuildings that give a glimpse into what a working 19th century Georgia farmstead might have looked like.
There are 6 or 7 outbuildings, which is very unusual to have them standing today.
All of the original outbuildings were cleaned up and repaired, and because of the fire, some reconstruction was required. The apple house is perched atop the root cellar to the northwest of the house. The root cellar below provided a constant cool temperature to store canned preserved items. Apples and other fruits and vegetables harvested in the fall were dried in the room above. Being so close to the house, the smokehouse that was used for curing and preserving meat had been completely destroyed in the fire. Using the same footprint, a rough-hewn multi-purpose storage building was constructed. A large corn crib was important to properly preserving the harvest. There are also a couple of small storage buildings, including a garage next to the corn crib, and one that serves as a home for the farmstead's current goat population, who have been known to dance a few steps. No farmstead would be complete without its barn. This large working barn, built of rough-hewn lumber, sits on the site of the original barn from the 1880s. It's still used to this day to house the cows. Across the road from the house sits the spring house. The actual spring originates under the country road and flows down through the spring house to the Toccoa River. The building has a room upstairs with a porch that was built by Press Davenport in the 1920s as a playhouse for his girls. With the outbuildings and the restored Cochran Davenport home, the property represents one of the only fully intact farmsteads found in Georgia today. In the year prior to her passing, Elma Ettman donated a conservation easement of the property to the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation, ensuring that the Cochran Davenport farmstead will remain protected in perpetuity for future generations.
This house represents for me, it's like a phoenix rising out of the flames. It's kind of my heritage.
The Cochran Davenport farmstead is one of the last of its kind, truly the jewel of the Dial Valley in the North Georgia mountains. Have a story idea for this show? Visit us at historybend.org and let us know.